Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns. Ignore that my name says test in the corner. I was setting up my microphone earlier, but I'm here with Daniel Popper of The Athletic, of Hops with Pop on his Substack. And you can check out his podcast on Apple and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. One of the hardest workers on the beat covering the team. So, Popper, how have you been doing, and how do you feel a couple days removed from the season ender?
Yeah, feeling good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, I think sort of overall, just having a couple weeks here to sort of digest the season as a whole. I think you sort of have to look at it as a success, considering where the Chargers were at the end of last season and where they are now, going from 5 wins to 11, making the playoffs. Obviously the results are one thing, but I think when you look at the process of what's going on as well, it signifies a turnaround with the organization, just in terms of how they built the roster, how Joe Ortiz, the general manager, approached roster building, the culture, the coaching, the preparation. It all was significantly improved, and I think they've built a really good foundation here on which to try to construct a Super Bowl caliber roster moving forward.
Yeah, we talk about with the Super Bowl caliber roster going forward. We'll get into free agency and the draft and all the things throughout the course of the offseason. Starting with that game, you've had plenty of time to watch it back, make your notes. I guess what stood out to you upon your rewatch of the game, maybe that changed from, the moment you watched it in Houston, or, you've given your kind of takeaways on Herbert and how he performed, kind of what stood out to you, I guess, the most from that game?
Yeah, I mean, watching it live, you got a sense that the protection was not holding up. I think watching it on film, became even more apparent. Um, it was a lot of the same issues that this offensive line and the protection in general sort of had all season. Issues picking up stunts, a lot of immediate pressure on the interior off of blitzes. And, they were significantly dominated at the line of scrimmage. And so, I think like initial reactions coming off the game was, okay, that was not one of Justin Herbert's better games. It was in fact like one of his worst games he's ever played. And that felt like the thing to write afterwards. But watching the film, like, you can't really separate Justin's performance from how the offensive line played. And, I think, Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh have a certain way that they want to play philosophically on offense. Like, they want to be a dominant line of scrimmage team. And, like the previous coaching staff used to say that too, but their decision making has aligned with that philosophy in terms of, spending the number 5 pick on a right tackle,
Right.
and how they've sort of formulated the offense and leaned into the running game and all of these things. And when they needed to play a dominant game up front, they couldn't. And so like that was my biggest takeaway coming off the game, is like they have to do something about the interior of the offensive line if they want to get to a place where they can be physically dominant up there against really good fronts, because they were manhandled by what is a really good front in the Houston Texans, but nobody on that offensive line played well. And I just felt like, just from a physicality standpoint, they couldn't match the level that the Texans brought. And that was something that it felt like the case watching it live, but you can't really know that for sure until you watch the tape. And then defensively, like, I came away feeling like they played a really good game defensively.
Yeah.
I felt like they played well enough on defense to win. Obviously they forced turnovers. It was a few plays, right? It was that, the 3rd and 16 crazy fumble,
Yeah.
that Stroud recovers and is able to find a guy downfield. That's just a wacky play that really turned the game. It's a couple, Nico Collins plays, 2 in man coverage against Christian Fulton, and then 1 in quarters when Fulton fell over, and that leads to, 80 plus yards. And then it's 1 scramble at the end of the first half where Stroud's able to move them into field goal range, and that was a missed tackle from Eddie Jackson. But it's like, 4 plays that they could have played better, and then, just a wacky sort of insane play where, it's just fumble luck bounces right into his hands. Other than that, like, they took the ball away. They rushed well. I thought they were pretty solid in coverage outside of those few plays I mentioned. And so, I think the big takeaway in terms of like specifics is how the offensive line played. I didn't think Jamari Salyer had a good game. I didn't think Bradley Bozeman had a good game. I didn't think, no one really played well. And then defensively, you felt like, up 6-0 early, if that play goes differently there and they're able to recover it and get points out of it, it felt like that game would have changed right there. And I felt like defensively overall, they played well enough to win.
Yeah, I just had this stinging feeling in my chest when it was 6-0 and they didn't take advantage, didn't make it 14-0 or even 10. It just felt like it was kind of inevitable that the Texans would get going at some point, and they have that 3rd and 14 moment, kind of like you mentioned. So I felt that offensively, the playoffs just show what your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
For large stretches of this season. And look, in the regular season, even the Chargers went 2-5 against playoff teams, right? I mean, you can make of that what it is. 2 of those games are Herbert injury games against the Steelers and the Chiefs, but we saw them against the Bucs. We saw them against the Ravens, and games that, the score of the Ravens game a little closer than I think some of the game indicates itself.
Yeah.
But I just think the playoffs showed that it's like, hey, look, you have your interior offensive line, and then it's Quentin Johnston and DJ Chark, trying to beat man coverage on the outside, right? Like, that's just something where I think they kind of definitely need to boost the firepower. I even talked about it after the game where, Will Dissly had the drops, obviously, but Will Dissly kind of came into the season sort of supposed to be like their tight end 2, right? Like, not necessarily tight end 2, but a guy
in the passing game, yeah.
Right. In the passing game, I think they definitely expected more out of Hayden Hurst. I think they expected more. They got a little bit from Stone Smart, but that there was always the kind of, do we trust him in the blocking game question regarding that with Roman, and so he didn't get to play that much.
Yeah.
So I just felt like there were a lot of guys that were kind of miscast in their roles relative to season expectation. It's like, they probably could have had Josh Palmer out there. They didn't have Josh Palmer out there. And he could have, helped a little bit in terms of easing up some pressure. Not that he changes the game necessarily, but just having a receiver on the outside that Herbert's been comfortable with for a very long time.
And he's a good enough route runner to beat man coverage in certain situations. Right.
Yeah. But it just felt like, I also just felt like at a certain point it got to Herbert feeling like he had to do something himself, right? And sort of like make it happen with the run game not working, guys kind of not getting open to the degree outside of, McConkey early in that game. And it led to a few uncharacteristic moments. I even think like that Herbert interception that leads to, QJ cross field, Lassiter on that one. Like, that just felt like there's Herbert, interceptions, of which we haven't seen that many this season, but that felt like a very uncharacteristic one where it just felt like Herbert was almost kind of just trying to like push it downfield, sort of force the issue.
He didn't have to. That was the weird part about that interception is like
unjusted.
You're up 6-0. You need 5 yards for a field goal. You've been playing a certain way all year where it's like, I don't want to say you've been hesitant because he has pushed the ball downfield, but like he has not really put the ball in harm's way. And so like if there was a moment in the entire season where you should definitely not put the ball into harm's way, it was right there. But like there's other context there, right? Where it's like, they shouldn't have called the play from that hash.
Yeah.
And, a better 50-50 ball guy potentially knocks that ball down, right? Like, so there's but it was like, I agree with you. It was bizarre, honestly, considering the way that he's played this season and also the way that he's like kind of always played in his career.
Right. Yeah. Just the ball security has always been paramount. I feel like he's been kind of aware of the situation. And then, the turnovers in the second half are kind of, they get down by 2 scores very early. The pick 6 happens. It's like, okay, with Dissly. So I didn't take as much away from that as much as the start of that game was just kind of very off from him. And then it just sort of unwound from there once they were down by kind of a certain amount.
Yeah. They had an opportunity. I mean, like they had an opportunity early in that game. Like I don't necessarily like think of this game the same way I think is of like the Ravens and the Bucs games.
No.
Where like I feel like they were just overpowered in those games. Yeah, right. Like with the Ravens, it was like, they had no answer for Derrick Henry, and they weren't physical enough in the run game. And then with the Bucs, they didn't have enough juice in the secondary to match up with Mike Evans and the rest of those receivers, Jalen McMillan. In this game, I felt like they were there, like they had enough talent to win that game. They just didn't take advantage of their opportunities early in the game. And then as the game progressed, you have a couple turnovers, and your protection can't hold up, and it kind of like unraveled, like you said. So yeah.
You've talked about it kind of a couple times this week, but stance on Herbert, I guess, taking everything into account, watching all the games this year, and knowing what the offseason plan is, knowing that they're going to get him help, where he needs it. What are kind of your overall takeaways this year as we now head into year 6 of Herbert, which makes me feel old.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was tough to really gauge, Herbert this year. I think like one thing that they drilled into him was, interceptions, turnovers lose games, sacks don't lose games. And so I think like that kind of impacted how he played. But like, I think a lot of this season was trying to get comfortable, because he had all of these new pass catchers, entirely new running back room, entirely new tight end room. And, every time that you felt like he was gaining momentum in that regard, there was some sort of injury that sort of derailed the chemistry building aspect of it. And so like, I don't think people should overlook the fact that he missed basically all of training camp while trying to learn a new offense, while trying to get on the same page with all of these new pass catchers. He misses 3 weeks and then comes back, starts practicing in week 2, suffers like a severe high ankle sprain, plays through it, gets knocked out of the Pittsburgh game. But that then impacts him basically through week 6, week 7, finally gets rolling a little bit, sprains his other ankle, late in the season. And so like it was, he's had years like this before, right? Like with, 2022 when he had the fractured rib cartilage, 2023 when he had the broken middle finger on his left hand. But it felt like they were really grinding all season to try and develop the chemistry and find what they were good at. And I think that process was delayed because of all of the injuries that Justin had that prevented him from fully practicing in training camp, prevented him from fully practicing early on in the season. And so I don't think we really saw the fully realized version of the offense until those final 3 regular season games, where I felt like it all clicked. I felt like the play calling was really solid. I felt like they were mixing it up well. I felt like Herbert was healthy. He was moving well. He was, impacting the game with his legs. He was playmaking in off-script situations. I think we really saw, like, for those last 3 games, what Justin Herbert can look like in this offense. And so, I think all things considered, he had a good year. Obviously, it's soured by, how he played in the playoff game. I think it was surprising considering how he played in those final 3 regular season games. But that's why I think the continuity aspect of this needs to be like front of mind, because, it'd be one thing if they had a healthy Herbert all season and they had struggled with consistency on offense. I just think it took them a lot longer to find that rhythm offensively because of all the injuries Herbert had, and because it sort of derailed the chemistry building aspect of it. And I think that, like, to me, is the first thing that I think about when I think about, okay, like, what was Justin Herbert's season? How did he look in this offense? And what does it mean moving forward? Because he kind of needs time on task with these guys within the offense to really get to a place where he can play consistent football. I think we saw that over the last 3 games, but I'd be curious to see what it looks like if he can stay healthy for a whole offseason, have that continuity in the offense, and not be dealing with all these injuries in training camp and early on in the season that affect his practice time.
Yeah, I think that you definitely felt that lack of time in August, where those first 4 games, he obviously doesn't play in any of the preseason like normal. And then you sort of felt that chemistry not really click, I would say, until like after the bye week. And then they have that Denver game, they have the Saints game. And that's sort of when it felt like, all right, now we have something here. And then, like you said, there would be another injury that derails it. Like, Gus goes on IR, or JK goes on IR, or, wide receiver goes on IR. And then, you're kind of then almost starting back at square one. And then it's like, all right, Jalen Reagor, come up for the practice squad. And here's the Cardinals game, right? Where now you have a big impact role. So I definitely felt like there were moments of that nature. And you mentioned continuity. Obviously, they are going to keep the same coaching staff in place. Jesse Minter did kind of surprisingly not get any coaching interviews for any of those openings. I don't know if you thought that was surprising or not, but they all are bringing back Greg Roman as offensive coordinator, to much to the chagrin of some of the fan base, maybe some of the fan base in support of it. But I do think, for me at least right now, you consider the continuity and not having to learn another system next year. I do think it is ultimately the right thing to run this back and see if the talent upgrades are enough to get you a better running game and some of the stuff that we talked about.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like fans are never satisfied with the offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
I've never. I mean, how many times
Not even Ben Johnson anymore. No.
I know, right? I mean, I feel like every time I do one of these interviews, we're talking about the offensive coordinator and how the fan base doesn't like the offensive coordinator. Like I think you're literally right. There's one organization that actually likes or liked its offensive coordinator,
but not
and that's
now.
Detroit. Yeah. I mean, you can probably say the Vikings are satisfied with Kevin O'Connell as their play caller. The Rams are satisfied with Sean McVay as their play caller. There's a handful, but I just, I understand the frustration, and I think it's fair to criticize some of the play calling, in that Texans game. We talked about, calling that boot from the wrong hash. Herbert's made that throw before. Like, he hit Mike Williams on basically the same play, a couple years ago, if you remember that. But yeah, like 4th and 2.
Short of the sticks.
Well, I think Quentin was supposed to be past the sticks. Yeah, like I actually asked Jim about that, and he admitted after the game that Quentin was. So if you watch the tape, he gets jammed at the line of scrimmage by Stingley. It knocks off the route, and he ends up just trying to get to the flat to sort of maintain the timing of the play. But the issue is that you're going to Quentin Johnston on a whip route against Derek Stingley in man coverage. When Ladd McConkey's having the game of his life, and I honestly, even if he's doubled, like still, like early, you remember that early in the game, this is right before the Disley drop in the first quarter, and Justin threw to Ladd McConkey on the corner route that was like just missed him. It was like a little bit. He was triple covered on that play. Miles Bryant, the nickel was on him, and both safeties were on him, and he still was open. So I think you can question that. Like, okay, why are you going to Quentin Johnston? Your 4th and 2 in that situation should be your best 4th and 2, 3rd and 2 would play. Like, that should be your best shot. And the best thing that you have is Quentin Johnston on a whip route, which is he's improved as a route runner, but that is a technique route, right? We've seen Keenan Allen run it a million times, but Keenan Allen is one thing and Quentin Johnston is entirely another thing. So you can question some of the play calling, but to me, it should be more about continuity. And I felt like there was enough good. I saw enough good in that 3-game stretch to end the season to say, okay, this is they should keep this together and, maintain the continuity. Don't force Justin Herbert to learn a new playbook, and then see what happens in year 2. If he can stay healthy through training camp, if you can add some pieces at receiver, if you can add a tight end, if you can add some pieces on the interior, can they improve the run game? Let's say they're able to draft a running back, see what it looks like in year 2. And if the same issues persist, then I think you have those conversations. But so I think some of the criticism is warranted, but I think more than anything, continuity should be the most important thing right now. And if it was a complete and utter disaster where there were no bright spots, then obviously that's one conversation. But I don't see that as the reality. And so there was enough good for me to say, okay, keep it together and see what it looks like in year 2.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you made the point on your show that it's okay, if this plateaus out at some point and, kind of like it did in Baltimore, and you decide Greg Roman at some point is not the guy for Lamar Jackson or not the guy for Justin Herbert anymore, you need a change to make it to the next level, then at that point, down the road, once you have the optimal roster around it, okay, right. But right now it's just none of it was optimal this year. So there's nothing to, I think, fully judge Roman off of, certainly in that capacity.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so that's what it is. And, like you said, some fans are just never going to be satisfied with the offensive coordinator. Not that that was a great game to end it on, but I did think there was enough positive this year, kind of like you said, to move forward. I want to change to another topic, which actually relates to something that was reported today. Adam Schefter of ESPN saying that Khalil Mack is coming back for the 2025 season, whether that be on the Chargers or whether that be somewhere else, as he enters potentially unrestricted free agency. You wrote a lot about Mack and Bosa and sort of the sacrifices that both of them made to run it back with the new regime. Where do you sort of guess that their heads are at entering this offseason, entering this period of uncertainty? Khalil in unrestricted free agency, Joey with, obviously his cap situation that's a little bit different. Where do you kind of think both of their heads are right now?
Yeah, I mean, both of them are at the stages of their careers where they just want to win. Like, I think both of them have made enough money at this point to be good. I think they've both told me individually, they've said it publicly that like their priorities right now are to try and win. Khalil Mack is 0-5 in the playoffs. Like, the guy has never won a playoff game. So, Khalil talking on Baggy Day, said some stuff that made you think like, okay, maybe he's really considering stepping away just because he's got 2 young kids. He's talking about spending more time with his family, all of that kind of stuff. But like that, those thoughts tend to trickle in when you're 33 going on 34 and you just, battled through 2 groin injuries and you lost another playoff game. And like, obviously like he's a human being. So those thoughts are going to enter, but
you had reported, I think after the Jacksonville game that he also considered retirement after that.
Right. Yeah. So it's something he's thought about, I think like after Jacksonville, he thought about it. Last year, I don't think he thought about it because he had 17 sacks and was an absolute monster and like maybe had the best season of his career. So I think he felt like he had some juice left in the tank. But, to me, he's never been an unrestricted free agent before. And he said that multiple times on Baggy Day. This is going to be if he does decide to play another year, this is going to be his first time where he can really test the market. So I think for him, it's going to be about like, what's my best opportunity to win? Now, I asked him, like, do you still believe that like this is your best chance to win here? And he said, absolutely. Like Justin Herbert and Derwin James and the guys here and Jim Harbaugh. Like, I think he believes in what's being built. And I think he believes in Herbert. He believes they have a good enough quarterback and a good enough coach to win. So I always felt like, it was sort of 50-50, because when a guy's talking about retirement, you never really know. But if he was going to come back, I always felt like there was a really good chance it was going to be back with the Chargers because, he believes in Minter. He believes in the defense. He believes in the scheme. He believes in Jim. He believes in Justin Herbert. He believes in Derwin. Like, I think he feels like they have the pieces to get it done. So, we'll see, but I think like wherever he goes, the priority is going to be winning. Now, Bosa's situation is obviously a little bit different. His cap hit is untenable for next season. Now, I asked Joe Ortiz at their end of season press conference, like, would you keep him at that cap hit? He said anything's possible. I highly doubt that happens.
Right.
It's over $36 million cap hit, and Joey's just at this point, he can't stay healthy enough to perform at the level necessary to, justify a $36.5 million cap hit. So what happens there? I think first and foremost, the Chargers would probably go to him and see if they could work another restructure. I don't know if Joey Bosa is going to take another pay cut. That to me, I think he might draw the line there. And so like, it's probably, in my opinion, trending towards, Joey getting cut, but that's just me speculating, like just looking at the numbers and the cap hit and how he's been playing and all of that kind of stuff. And so like, that's really what's going to sort of decide it is, what happens with the contract? What do the Chargers think's the best option? Can they negotiate something? Does Joey Bosa want to, play elsewhere? He has said that he wants to retire as a Charger. But obviously like there's always that looming idea of going to play with his brother in San Francisco. But that would, at this stage mean reuniting with Brandon Staley. So obviously, so So obviously a lot of factors at play. But so I would think it's like I would think it's pretty likely that that Khalil's been able to come back to the Chargers, just the way that he's talked about it, and the way the Chargers feel about him. The Joey Bosa situation is a little bit more difficult to nail down just because of the cap hit and financially what they'd have to work through. And if Joey comes back, it would have to be effectively a second year with a pay cut. How, is he able to digest that? We'll see.
Yeah, and I just think if you want to get into like bringing this edge room back, I think, like you said, if you get week one Joey Bosa, who was absolutely incredible in that game against the Raiders, we're talking about a different conversation. But after he came back in the Saints game after getting kind of re-injured in Carolina, it wasn't the same level of performance. And so
yeah, he was fighting.
Right. He was fighting.
I mean,
And, he went from playing, to his credit, went from playing, 20 snaps a game to playing, 40, 50. Right. And so I think that was a process to even get back. But yeah, I felt like you could see it towards the end of the year too. Mack is obviously a little bit older. Joey is, even in your article, I believe kind of hinted at, not knowing how much time he has left, whether that's a year, whether that's 2 years. And so I think even they kind of know retirement's coming, and the speed, I think that they don't necessarily have on the edge right now, is something that I think they should consider in terms of pass rush. Now, you can obviously supplement that by getting a defensive interior lineman that, they have Poona Ford. They, if they want to get somebody that's another kind of pass rusher to like supplements around there, and you can draft an edge and so on and so forth. But I just wonder, I guess, running it back with both of them at their ages, and then, injury history with Bosa, but then even Khalil this year having the double groin injury that happened early in the year that impacted him at that time. I've just kind of been wondering, I guess, how tenable that is to kind of run it back, even if Bosa were to take a pay cut.
Yeah, no, I think those are all fair points. Like, I think they need to get younger in that room, like 100%. I think it's a position they should be targeting regardless of what happens with Bosa and Mack. I think like a realistic scenario is like bringing Khalil back, because I still think he has another good year in him. He wasn't like 23 was like elite,
right?
Like dominant.
I was looking back on the numbers of that today, and he had 88 pressures last year, which was second only to his 2016 DPOY season. He had 98.
Yeah, he was ridiculous. Yeah, he was ridiculous last year. This year wasn't quite at that level. I think he was close as a run defender. I don't think he was anywhere close to as good as a pass rusher. But I still think it's worth bringing him back.
Right.
I think like he still can give you a quality year. He's been very durable for the Chargers. And so like that makes sense to me. But like it feels like you need some sort of exit plan. In a perfect world, Tuli Tuipulotu would have taken a big step in year 2, but I don't think that happened. I don't want to say he plateaued, but I don't think he took the jump that I was expecting him to. Yeah, I was expecting him to in year 2. He had a really impressive rookie season. And so I think you have a piece there. I think he's like a long-term starter on the edge, but after this year, I wonder sort of what the upside is. Like, I don't know if he can be sort of your number one guy. I think he's more of a number 2 type edge rusher. So like, I think you need to start thinking about the future. And so like looking early in the draft for an edge rusher, so like, I think like the scenario that I'm sort of thinking about is like bring Khalil back, you move on from Joey and see if you can work out something if he wants to come back. If not, okay. And then, you keep Bud Dupree on the roster and then find some sort of young piece in the draft to try and round out that room, get younger, and then have sort of an exit plan, for when, if this is Khalil's last year, if he signs a 1-year deal and decides to retire, after 25, then you sort of have Thule, young player, and then you can sort of start building it from there moving forward.
Speaking of free agency and draft situations, we talked about the interior offensive line and, that potentially needing to change this offseason. I'm going to do one of my favorite things where I like to put you on the spot, but over under 1.5 new interior offensive line starters week 1, 2025 season.
The callback to the Keenan Allen.
I'm getting you on Chargers Reddit again. But Bozeman,
30, I think
37%, I think, something like that.
I was a year early, okay? I was a year early. They did trade him eventually.
Bozeman, Pipkins, Zion, over under 1.5 replaced at the start of the 2025 season.
It's a good line.
Yeah, I'm setting the line.
Yeah, no, it's a good line. Because you feel like there's going to be one, right? You feel like they're going to have a different starting center. I think right now I would go.
I mean, over. if you take take Harbaugh at his word, his season-ending press conference was a ringing endorsement of Bozeman.
I would recommend
much of that, but
I would recommend to the people not to do that. Just as a rule of thumb. Right. Try and find one time he criticized a player in a press conference this year. I urge you.
I'm trying to remember from all the times that I watched if there was a time he criticized the player.
His quarterback threw 4 interceptions in a playoff game, and he refused to acknowledge that the guy didn't play up to his usual standards. So,
only thing I can remember is like Minter taking out ASJ's tackling. That's like the only thing I can remember. Not Harbaugh.
Minter is not Harbaugh. Those are 2 different guys. Yeah. I think like you can take Minter, you can take more at face value. But this is on a tangent, but it's part of the Harbaugh experience. Like he does it for a reason, Like I was talking to Rashawn. I put this quote in my takeaways off the press conference. I was talking to Rashawn for the culture story that I wrote, and it was something that ended up not making the story. But he was like, part of Harbaugh being consistent all the time is the fact that he always takes the blame if things go poorly. Like he will never put the blame on the players, which is like very different than how it used to be around here. And so the idea that he doesn't criticize players is for a reason, and it does mean something in the locker room that he's always taking blame. So, but with that being said, you can't, you can't take him saying that we loved Bradley as like, okay, they're definitely going to have, him back as the starting center. Now he could be back as a backup, which I think is like the likeliest scenario, but I'm going to go over 1.5. I'm going to go over 1.5. I think they'll have a new center and a new right guard. I just the way I do this job is I trust my eyes. I trust the money and I trust my eyes more than anything else. And the right guard right now, Trey Pipkins, battling through a bunch of injuries, and I give him a lot of credit for moving inside, and he's really, to me, more naturally a tackle. But you're talking about nearly a $10 million cap hit for, a starting guard who is functional, but has limitations at that position. So that's the money side of things. And what my eyes tell me is that, they really got manhandled and dominated in that Texans game. And if I'm like Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh, they're watching that tape back, and offensively, their number one priority is being physical at the line of scrimmage. And they lost that battle as handily as they did. That's a taste that I don't think they're going to get out of their mouths without, improving on the offensive line. I don't think they're going to go into another season, without making dramatic improvements to the offensive line based on how that game went. So, and they have the resources to do it, which is a part of this as well. Again, going back to following the money, you're talking about, I set up my spreadsheet the other day, so right now you're talking about $47 million in cap space that they can spend. That is $47 million in 2025 cap hits that they can take on, whether that's re-signing internal free agents or, signing external free agents. That's a lot of cap space. That is a lot of spending space. And so, the idea of finding two new starters, with all the draft picks that they have and the resources that they have in terms of cap space, like that is a realistic outcome. So to me, what I would do is I would look to draft a center on day 1 or 2 that can come in. I'd re-sign Bradley Bozeman, and so you have sort of two options there at center. In a perfect world, the rookie's able to win that job and start. If not, you have Bozeman, who's durable, and you know what you're getting with him, and maybe the rookie can play later in the season. Whatever happens there, and then the guard market is a possibility. Like there are like legit options on the guard market. Now, some of the guard contracts have been insane over the last 3-4 years. So maybe you're not shopping at the top of that market. Like Trey Smith is going to sign for whatever, $25 million a year if he hits the open market. But like I've thrown this name out. A guy like Aaron Banks, out of San Francisco. Like maybe that's an option. So I think there are ways to upgrade at right guard in free agency, and then find a center in the draft, and then that's how you get to 2. But I think just based on how that game in Houston went, like my gut says that it's gonna be over 1.5.
No. And then also this offseason, they do have to make the 5th-year option choice on Zion Johnson, which is kind of the other thing coming down.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. I don't think right now it would go Zion's way, but we'll see. Yeah, the right guard situation was just like, I felt like I was going crazy this year because they effectively give it to Trey in June, right? Harbaugh, I remember, had that presser before they did the practice, like at the naval base, and he just said, yeah, left to right, it's going to be Slater, Zion, Bozeman, Pipkins, and Alt. And so there was never really any true competition for him. And then we're in like week 18, and it's like, yeah, we're having a right guard competition. Like, I just think, out of all the things that happened, now part of that was Trey's injury, and then they brought in Jamari to do some of the short yardage stuff at some point before he eventually started. But still, I was just like, you can't do a right guard competition in like week 14 or 16 or 18. And that was something that, like,
well, they can. They did.
They can, and they did. And I felt like, in that playoff game, they kind of paid the consequences for it. Maybe there was no winning regardless of who you started. But I guess there not being like real confidence in one of those guys to be the starter when you gave it to Trey out the gate, which partially was related to his contract. He makes too much money to be a swing tackle. So let's, try to kind of move him around and, live with the bumps and bruises that come with him playing guard or the peaks and valleys. And it just felt like at a certain point, they weren't willing to do that anymore. And then they had the Salyer thing, and then the injuries happened. And then it's like, wild card weekend, who's going to start? I don't know. Like, I felt like, of the criticisms of the coaching staff, of which, you can label a few, that was one that stuck out to me. I don't know how you felt about that one.
Yeah, I would push back on the idea that they played Trey because of the contract. That's just not how this regime is going to operate. I think that he was their best shot. And now, like, a lot of fans were like, saw how Jamari played against the Titans, saw how he played against the Patriots. And well, like, why isn't this guy starting? And it's like, go watch the film from the Titans game.
The Patriots and the Titans. Yeah, the Patriots and the Titans. And
Jeffrey Simmons was just did not want to be on the field that day. Like, that's just, I'll say it point blank. Like, he just, I know, like, I've seen him play at his best, and that was maybe 55% of what he's capable of.
Like, I felt even bad, like, I did, posting like the top 5 PFF grades. It's like, oh wow, Bradley Bozeman had an awesome game against the Patriots.
Like, and then like the Patriots are the Patriots. But right. I think you saw there's a reason that they went with Trey. Like, and just go watch the film from the Texans game and see how Jamari played in that game. And like, so I think they went with their best option. Like, the reality is they pieced this thing together. Like, they came in the offseason last year with, they were $50+ million over the cap. This was about, creating as much space as possible while maintaining, what you could of the roster and piecing it together and then hoping that you hit on a bunch of these bargain free agents, which they did, and that you get good enough coaching from Harbaugh and his staff to elevate what you have. And that's what happened. But now it's a completely different offseason, right? Now you have, it's 63 million in cap space. I factor in draft pick compensation and all this other stuff to sort of get to a number that I call like adjusted effective spending space. So but you have like a lot of space to use. And so now, like, instead of trying to piece it together and work with what you got, you can really go identify pieces that you like and try and build it more in your image. And so, but I think Trey was their best option. I think that showed, I think the Texans game kind of proved that without Jamar played.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. When it came down to it, any other, we've talked about the edge, we've talked about interior offensive line. I guess we haven't gotten to receiver, and there's been some stuff with the DK Metcalf rumor out there.
Yeah.
Any other spots, including receiver, that stick out to you in this market, in this free agency class, draft class that we're about to head into?
Yeah, we kind of hit on them, but receiver is going to be interesting because I was actually thinking about this before we hopped on. Like, think about the free agent receiver contracts that have been handed out in the last 5 years.
Right.
A lot of them are massive overpays. Like Calvin Ridley. I was going down the list in my head. Like Calvin Ridley. This is just off the top of my head. Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Kenny Golladay. Like, these are the guys that are getting signed in free agency. And so yeah, if T Higgins is available, make a play. But, I don't think that, spending top of market for a receiver, is, necessarily the best option, unless you have a guy like T Higgins. Now the trade market is interesting. Somebody brought up Devontae Adams on my stream the other day. Obviously DK Metcalf's been thrown about, and there's obviously a connection there with Sanjay Lal, the receivers coach who coached him in Seattle. The money is reasonable. The question is, if you trade for DK Metcalf, is he expecting an extension? Would they give him an extension? That's part of the conversation. Would he be willing to play on the final year of his deal at 18 million and then see what happens, so they can get a look at him in the offense, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the idea of okay, go spend $25 million in a receiver, I don't know if history would tell you that that's the best option, And also you look at how the Ravens have sort of gone about finding receivers. They've spent a lot of first round picks on receivers, but they've really attacked it through the draft versus, really being super aggressive in free agency for receivers. Now they've they found sort of supplemental pieces where, Nelson Aguilar or Odell Beckham, some guys like that. So, receiver is going to be really interesting, but they have to do something. It's very obvious to me. And then they need a pass catching tight end. That is very obvious. I give a lot of credit to Will Dissly. We talked about him at the top. He was way better in the passing game than I thought he would be.
Yeah.
But he still had a bunch of really critical drops.
Right.
And I think like you said, weaknesses get exposed in the playoffs, and he had, a couple bad drops in that game. And so you also mentioned roles, right? I think getting a pass catching tight end that can be that sort of number one option in that room would put Will Dissly into a role that fits him really well, where he's blocking, and then you can still do some of the screen stuff. And, he's obviously shown a little bit as a yak guy. So, I think that has to be a priority. And then what do they do at corner? That's going to be really interesting to me. Obviously hitting on these 2 5th-round picks changes that room significantly, but they need a number one corner to get to where they want to go. When you get into these playoff matchups, every team in there is going to have a stud guy on the outside, and you need a corner that can match up. Now, I thought that Cam Hart would have been a good matchup for Nico Collins, but how it shook out is that Christian Fulton got most of the reps on Nico Collins, and Nico Collins won that battle. So, how much trust can you put in Cam Hart? I think you feel like you have 2 starters, in Tarheeb still and Cam Hart, but Cam Hart had a bunch of injuries this year. You know,
Right.
obviously the concussion stuff is super scary, but then he has a shoulder injury and gets knocked out of the playoff game. I think he has the skill set to be that type of guy. But how much are they investing in that room? Do they consider shopping at the top of the market at corner? I think that could be interesting. DJ Reed is a guy that's going to be available as an unrestricted free agent. So that's another position that I would throw out there. That's kind of interesting to me, like how they sort of approach corner. And then obviously, like bringing Christian Fulton back is an option. But he was sort of the way he was talking on Daggy Day made it seem like he was gonna really test the market. This was like a 1 year prove it. I showed that I can stay healthy. I showed that I can play good ball. Let me go try and like capitalize on it elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think you saw that I mean, I think Dobbins probably has a much higher likelihood chance to be back. We'll see how all that shakes out, but a lot of those 1 year guys, including, Bozeman, Dobbins, like everyone who took a chance, Puna, I think it'll be interesting to see what their free agent numbers end up being. But I think wide receiver, like you said, wide receiver is an interesting market because you kind of have a lot of like aging guys in this market too, where it's like, do you want to give a lot of money to Stephon Diggs coming off of,
Amari Cooper?
Amari fans will cluster for Keenan to come back, but even he's older now. And there's kind of like the slot redundancy with Ladd, if he wants to play there versus Ladd's playing 70% of snaps in the slot.
Yeah.
I think Darius Slayton's like a little bit interesting if they wanted to test that as a guy on the outside who's not going to cost a ton of money. So that one is kind of one that interests me.
Yeah. But I mean, what is Darius Slayton going to get on in the open market? Like part of the problem is you have these deals that are now benchmarks that agents point to when they go into negotiation. So like, is Darius Slayton going to take less than like $18 million a year? Is Darius Slayton worth $18 million a year?
That's fair.
So that's sort of what I'm saying is like you go through like I'm probably going to look into this at some point, but just like going through some of these, free agent wide receiver contracts and like the history tells us is that you're going to have to overpay a little bit. And what the history also tells us is that when you do overpay, you're not getting an ROI that, justifies what you're spending. So, I would get the sense that they're just going to keep attacking this through the draft unless like they can get T Higgins. Because that's like he just fits so well, or attacking the trade market, and I think DK Metcalf like absolutely makes sense. But I would be worried about like shopping on that second tier in the receiver market because you're probably going to overpay, and you're probably not going to get the ROI that you need.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how the wide receiver market pays out. We'll see how free agency pays out, the draft, a lot of stuff to cover in the offseason, which I'm sure you'll do a good job of doing on Hops with Pop and The Athletic and all the other stuff. We'll be doing content in the offseason and all that. But Daniel, any final thoughts on the Chargers 2024 season or thoughts going into 2025 to close out the show?
It's nice not covering a coaching search for once.
I was thinking like we've done this for 3 years now, and the last 2 times we've had you on are after Jacksonville, which was a disaster, and then a coaching search. So
I'm trying to think the last time I didn't have any coaching search at all. Did Anthony Lynn make staff changes after 2019? I don't think he did.
I actually don't remember.
I don't think he did. I think he kept everybody. But that was actually that was the quarterback search because Phillip was gone. So you can kind of factor that. But like literally, like it's been since 19 because 20 Lynn got fired. 21 they fired Darius Swinton, the special teams coordinator. So there was a special teams coordinator search. Wow. 22 was Joe Lombardi was out. 23 Staley was out. So I'm a little bit biased about this because it's just nice not to be covering a coaching search. But continuity, definitely continuity. No.
Well, you'll be doing work on other stuff, even if it's not a coaching search. But
absolutely.
Thank you to Daniel for joining us today. And as always, bolt up. See you guys next time.